Christchurch, Spitalfields, in London's East End. But this is not a wedding celebration, nor is it a ceremony offering the blood and flesh of Christ. This is a party for the artists Gilbert and George, whose major retrospective opened earlier in the evening at Tate Modern. This church is at the end of the very street where Gilbert and George have lived since the late 1960s. But why have so many of the great and the good in the art world travelled to the artist's own backyard to celebrate? Tonight we'll find out. We're going to be at home with Gilbert and George. Fournier Street, London E1. This is where Gilbert and George have lived and worked for the last 40 years. It's now a highly desirable, fashionable address. But they were here when the area was populated by the homeless, the Jewish rag trade, poor East End families, and Cockney market traders.
Hello, Mr. Allen.
Very nice to see you, Mr. Allen. Welcome.
Gilbert and George first met as fellow students at St Martin's School of Art in 1967. 2 years later, they began appearing in public together as living sculptures. They sang along with Flanagan and Allen's nostalgic music hall hit, Underneath the Arches. This was the radical beginning of a unique partnership that has endured 4 decades and produced a vast body of work. So when exactly did you first decide that you'd only work together? Why this idea of 2 people but 1 artist?
I really believed in the end we needed each other. Because when we left St. Martin's School of Art, we were lost. We didn't know actually how to start doing something because we were outsiders. We were what you call regarded as some eccentric who would do art that doesn't fit in.
The lone artist has a problem because you have to ask questions. If an artist is painting a picture, he has to decide whether to have another cow in the corner or not. And no answer comes back, of course, because with 2 people it's very easy. You ask the question, somebody gives an answer. Yeah, put a lot of cows in. Good. Let's go steam ahead. Let's have a herd.
An artist is so alone in the world, no? Especially if you are rejected all the time. You feel like suicidal, no? In some way. And 2, you are able to comfort yourself and invent this idea that nothing matters. Nothing matters. Sure, we did in some way in the end become the imprisoned monks in 12 Fournier Street.
And we like that. We like to be here alone and weird, and we live very simply, in fact.
As I was about to discover, this lovingly restored East End monastery for 2 is a very specific order, one that is obsessively based exactly on that. Order. In the pious shadow of the Hawksmoor Church at the end of their street, Gilbert and George have built their own shrine, a large modern studio for making large modern pictures, inspired by their experiences of living in London. This is where the cataloguing and preservation of a life spent living and working together as one artist is obsessively filed and referenced.
The whole of this wall in Studio 2 contains our index to subject matters. So they're all images that we can draw from to put in our pictures. They're all images that represent thoughts and feelings. So they have to be categorized into different subjects. Sexual images, political images, religious images.
Because we always take images all the time. We take all those images on our 35mm cameras. And we have contact sheets. That's how we design our pictures. They're all designed from contact sheets. I mean, for us, it's very important that we are able to, that they are not lost once we photograph them. So we have to keep them always in order and categorized all the time. If not, we wouldn't know where to start.
You take so many of these pictures because...
I think in some way artists always did that. They repeat the same subject again and again and again until it creates meaning.
So that's interesting that you're capturing, as you're capturing all these images, these thousands of images that you have here, you're becoming more and more familiar with them all the time.
Going deeper and deeper into the subject, yes.
Their extensive library of contact sheets reveals images ranging from newspaper headlines to crucifixes, bodily fluids to urban nature. And, of course, thousands of images of Gilbert and George themselves, taken exclusively by themselves. So am I right in thinking that all these images were taken within 100 metres of this house?
All of our images are taken either here in the studio, the vast majority, or in the neighbourhood. We never felt that we were the artists that needed to go to exotic countries to become inspired. We always think that London is the centre of the universe anyway, and the East End is probably the most typical planet Earth place that we ever met. It's more actual here. We always say if you step out of the front door in the morning, that all of life that's going on in the world is there.
There are so many races all mixed up together. No? It feels like, I don't know, like Babylon in some way, not all the different language. Everybody speaks a different language, and still in some way it works.
Everyone is from somewhere in the world, except for a tiny percentage of aging honkies. And they look completely zonked. They're walking around in this strange world where there are no longer any stationer shops, where there are no longer any... They just don't know where they are anymore. It's extraordinary.
Gilbert and George have just made up their own headline. It's a preemptive strike in preparation for a big event, a major retrospective of their art being installed here at Tate Modern. There are over 200 works, a mere fifth of their 40-year output. They're the first British artists ever to show at Tate Modern, and they're leaving nothing to chance. It's a takeover, or as they like to call it, a Tate-over. They'll be unveiling their newest artwork, a series of 6 enormous pictures created from genuine newspaper headlines about the London bombings of 2006. They've also planned the entire installation themselves, with the help of a room-size scale model of the whole of the 4th floor of Tate Modern. So, all your own work, eh?
Absolutely. No, we always plan our exhibitions, and we always did. We always create a model of the space, and then we have miniature models of all of our pictures, so we can install it in every detail. And that's very important because museums who install exhibitions do it to suit their taste, how they like the galleries or the museums to look like. And we design it for the viewer.
They might challenge that, of course. They might say, that's what we do. We do that. We hang.
No, they like to be artistic. No, they like to be... They are the gods of...
At the moment, there's a fashion sort of nouvelle cuisine installation. Eh? the smaller picture on the biggest wall is what they really like.
Yes. I think we know what we want. And everybody is so happy because no big battles. They're all happy. Don't you think, George?
It's all decided. We take the model to the museum. And the same with galleries as well.
Is it no big battles because you're so autocratic that nobody else gets a look in?
That's one way of looking at it, yes. No, we didn't trust a lot of people, that's true.
Gilbert and George are inclined to mistrust a British art establishment that has in the past regarded them with suspicion. But Nick Sirota, the director of Tate, has now given them something no other British artist has ever had. How did you get yourselves in the Tate Modern anyway, given that British artists aren't supposed to be in the Tate Modern?
I think they were cornered. They didn't know. They couldn't say actually no.
They didn't want to write one of those historical letters that are all around in the art. The man who refused to free Picasso in '52 is a sort of shame for them. They never wanted to write a letter saying no.
English artists have to be at Tate Britain, and modern artists are at Tate Modern. So we
not British artists.
Not British artists. We thought for 40 years we have been campaigning to be international modern artists. We can't fly anywhere. We don't have to be provincial artists going down to Tate Britain. We wanted to make it a journey. We want to say we started in '68 and the big journey of 40 years of making pictures. In 1968, when we started out, we were not sure where to go. We thought maybe we just make drawings or living sculptures.
So these are sort of life-size?
They're roughly life-size. We were invited to show in Paris called Paris 14, and we thought we couldn't go there. So we thought maybe we have to send ourselves there in a tube. So we made these two drawings that you could send by post. But already at that time, the idea was that we were artists that wouldn't do anything. We just would exist. So we had to make them antique like you could find them.
So you sort of disowned them. They're there and they're found objects.
We didn't make them, we found them.
Do you see the décollage with fire? We rolled them up and then burnt the edges. We wanted them to look like ancient letters in a museum, ancient documents. We didn't want fresh, modern art. We wanted to be more established. And we even had our address and telephone number on them, which nobody ever uses, of course.
Of course they don't.
It's still the same number to this day.
For 5 years, we had the telephone number on every artwork that we did because we wanted to be famous. So we wanted to be in business.
We wanted to be known.
And it's extraordinary because it's still the same number.
You've grown, Gilbert. A little bit.
Yeah, they're rather tiny here, yes, like a little doll.
Yes, whereas George has made himself that much bigger.
Roughly how?
No.
Still a little
George
smaller.
is shrinking and I'm growing up.
That'll be it.
Nice people with nice manners, but God knows.
Gilbert and George had dedicated their lives to art, but as unlikely candidates for either a teaching post or a government grant, they found themselves alone and poor and without a studio in which to work. They turned to their only resource, themselves.
And so we felt that we were the art then, because that was all we had. And then we bought a little gramophone record in a shop near Euston of Underneath the Arches. And we played it in the studio, and we felt we could move to that tune and project emotions and feelings that it would be very difficult to put into simple words. They'd be delicate, humanistic sadnesses that you could do with poetry or maybe with music, and we could do it with living sculpture, maybe.
We felt like that. We felt alone.
It was autobiographical as well.
Oh, yes, at the beginning, yes.
The two tramps
Us.
trying to be jolly, the life, it's raining and the trains are rattling by. The so-called younger generation sculptors, they made the big step to take away the plinth. And we went one stage further and we took away the sculpture as well.
Gilbert and George are now themselves the older generation, the godfathers of contemporary British art. And the new kids on the block really are on the block. London's East End, a no-go area for artists when they first ventured here in the early 60s, is now home to many members of Britain's new art establishment. Tracy Emin, Dinos Chapman, Gillian Waring and Chris Ofili, to mention only a few.
They say there are upwards of 20,000 artists in the East End of London. Is that right? Many of them around here. It's the biggest concentration of artists in the world.
That is amazing.
And that's it.
Are we here?
Here we are, number 12, the top floor, where we created Underneath the Arches.
And George lived here in 1964. It was amazing. When you used to teach the hooligans in Hoxton Street.
Hooligans? You talked
I mean, they
hooligans.
were what they call, how would you call them?
You just called them hooligans?
Yes, because they were from very poor whites.
Poor backward families.
Poor
in a
whites,
way,
in
huh?
fact.
Okay.
And of course, one has to remember it was such a different East End at that time. There were 3 huge hostels for tramps or ex-army people who were damaged in some way by the war. They were mostly people who had committed some minor sexual offence in some remote country part of Britain, so they always moved to London, or they had a problem with drink, so they would move to London. So the area was inhabited largely by people from hostels, in fact, yes.
Down and out.
And they were all roaming around all the time. It was an extraordinary atmosphere.
You felt rather at home with all that, did you?
I liked it. Oh, they
Liked
were
it.
fantastic.
They loved it so much, it proved addictive. Gilbert and George also took to drinking heavily in the early 70s.